Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive.
Good to be here.
I'm your host, and, well, our goal here is pretty straightforward. Cut through all the noise, give you that shortcut to being genuinely well-informed on some really crucial topics.
Yeah, we take all the research, the sources, the notes, and just try to pull out the most important bits of knowledge, the key insights.
Exactly. And hopefully keep it engaging, maybe even a little surprising along the way.
That's the plan.
So today we're doing a really focused deep dive. It's a comprehensive analytical commentary, a review, really, of a specific YouTube video.
Right. One by Engineer Muhammad Ali Mirza, who many people know simply as Emam.
Precisely. And our aim is to help you, the listener, get a handle on the scholarly points he's making, the Islamic references he draws on, and, the core arguments in his analysis.
Especially concerning this incredibly complex situation between Iran and Israel.
It really is. Now, it's super important we clarify this right up front, this deep dive. It's our independent analysis. It's commentary on content that's publicly out there.
Yeah, we're not, talking directly to Engineer Muhammad Ali Mirza, and we're definitely not claiming to represent his exact views word for word.
Not at all. This is just our impartial effort. We're trying to distill and explain the ideas in his work using authentic Islamic references where possible and general knowledge purely for educational purposes.
Helping you understand the different facets of the argument.
Exactly. The specific video we're unpacking is from Engineer Muhammad Ali Mirza's public session videos. It's YouTube video ID 204, and the title is Iran-Israel War.
And in it, Emam gives this really deep analysis looking at the conflict, the geopolitical context around it, and, importantly, the relevant Islamic principles.
So our discussion today will dig into his arguments, the structure he uses, helping you hopefully understand the complexities of this really critical issue.
Sounds good. Where do we start?
Okay, let's unpack this then. Engineer Muhammad Ali Mirza, he structures his whole analysis around 7 key scholarly points.
7 points, okay.
Yeah, so we're going to dive into each one. We'll explore the arguments he makes, the context he provides, and, what the wider implications might be for us to think about.
All right, let's get into point 1.
So point 1. Emam kicks things off by addressing this barrage of criticism he got. It was after a previous 70-minute talk he gave.
Right, I remember that. There was quite a reaction online.
Huge reaction. He was specifically accused, and this is a heavy one, of being an agent of Jews and Christians.
Yeah, that's a serious accusation in these contexts.
It really is, and the reason. Because he dared to suggest that maybe Iran should pursue some kind of deal to de-escalate the conflict.
Just suggesting diplomacy got him labels like that.
Apparently so. It's a really emotionally charged accusation, isn't it?
It certainly is. And, what's really insightful, I think, is how Emam tackles this head on. He doesn't just dismiss it.
No, he engages with it.
He does. And he reframes it quite cleverly, actually. He sort of turns it back onto his critics.
How so?
Well, he basically argues that they might be the real agents, maybe unintentionally, of course, if what they really want is for Iran to just charge into a direct military fight with the U.S.
Okay.
Because, let's be realistic, given the power difference, that would almost certainly lead to Iran's destruction, or at least immense suffering for his people.
So he's saying wanting that outcome aligns more with what an enemy agent might desire.
That's the implication, yeah. It forces his critics and anyone listening to actually weigh the real-world consequences.
Yeah.
The pragmatic outcome versus just raw emotional rhetoric.
That's a powerful way to reframe it.
It is. And Emam asserts that his suggestion, the phrase he used was kneel down. This quite which is sort of a colloquial way of suggesting humility or concession.
Right, not necessarily literal kneeling.
Exactly. He says it wasn't him showing cowardice, or even his personal opinion necessarily. He argues he was simply stating Iran's actual long-standing desire, their consistent diplomatic efforts over years to get some kind of deal.
He backs this up.
Oh, yeah. He points out Iran's history. They initiated talks. They participated in multiple rounds, including the big one, the 2015 JCPOA.
The nuclear deal with the Obama administration.
That's the one. And he connects it to their dire economic situation. He mentioned the exchange rate, 42,000 Iranian rial to $1 at the time.
Ouch. That kind of pressure.
Exactly. It's a huge driving factor for wanting sanctions relief, for wanting economic stability. So his point is, it's just a pragmatic view of Iran's national interests, not some kind of betrayal.
Okay, that makes sense. But he also got fleck for something else, didn't he? Something about Israel's Iron Dome system.
He did, yeah. And this is interesting because Emam has technical expertise. For him to acknowledge the effectiveness of a piece of military technology, Well, it sparked intense controversy.
Even though it seems like just an objective technical observation, why the backlash?
Precisely. And Emam clarifies this too. He says his intention was absolutely not to praise Israel as some kind of good guy or endorse their policies. Not at all.
So what was his purpose then?
Purely technical, purely practical. He wanted to highlight the Iron Dome's success rate, which is around 90%, give or take, how it intercepted incoming rockets and prevented, catastrophic damage inside Israel.
Okay.
And he uses this analogy. He says, appreciating the technical skill behind the Iron Dome is like, say, appreciating a great athlete on an opposing team. You study their technique to learn, to improve your own team. It's not about loyalty to the opposition.
That's a good analogy.
Isn't it? He's clear. No system is perfect, 100%. But the Iron Dome did save Israel from massive damage and casualties. That's just a factual observation from his perspective.
And his goal in stating that fact?
It was a call, really. A call for Muslim nations to invest in their own capabilities, to develop similar advanced defense technologies, robust military systems, instead of relying on what he calls domes of saints. It's a critique of relying solely on spiritual hope without taking the necessary physical steps, the preparations.
So it connects to that Islamic principle, asbab.
Exactly, asbab. Taking all the necessary physical means, doing your homework, preparing properly before you rely on divine help. You do your part first.
And he has credibility here, you mentioned.
He does. He draws on his own background. He mentions his deep professional experience with ballistic missile systems back in Pakistan. He even notes being directly involved in the first test of the Gowri missile.
During the Musharraf era.
That's what he implies, yeah. So this background gives him, a certain authority when discussing military realities, capabilities, and the need for technical advancement. It's not just armchair commentary.
Got it. Now, you mentioned he also gets into history, which can be really sensitive.
Extremely sensitive.
Yeah.
And this part is genuinely interesting and vital, I think, for understanding how historical stories get used or misused today. He takes time to clarify a really critical historical narrative, one that's often profoundly misunderstood. The journey of Imam Hussein ibn Ali to Karbala.
Yes. A hugely significant and emotive event in Islamic history.
Absolutely. And because it's so emotive, it's often interpreted and sometimes distorted in many different ways, often to stir up specific emotions or justify actions today.
So Imam offers a correction.
A crucial clarification, yes. He stresses that Imam Hussein's movement towards Kufa, where the events of Karbala tragically unfolded, was fundamentally a political struggle for leadership.
Political, not purely religious or military.
At its core, yes, political. He explains Imam Hussein received thousands of invitations from the people of Kufa. They wanted him to lead them against the ruling Umayyad Caliph Yazid.
So he was responding to a call for leadership.
Exactly. It wasn't, as it's sometimes wrongly portrayed, some kind of reckless military campaign where he knowingly marched his family into a doomed battle seeking martyrdom.
That's a common misconception, isn't it?
A very common one. Imam clarifies the war was actually imposed on him and his small group while they were en route to Kufa. His journey was a strategically calculated political move, aiming to establish what he saw as just leadership.
Not a blind suicidal mission.
Precisely not. And this correction is vital because, as Imam points out, misinterpretations of Karbala are often used to promote violence today, or to justify emotionally driven, unprepared actions in modern conflicts.
Instead of learning the deeper lessons?
Exactly. Instead of drawing lessons about wisdom, patience, strategic foresight, and the complexities of leadership from Islamic history, Imam's focus is on accurate historical understanding to inform today's decisions, rather than letting romanticized or distorted versions lead to, frankly, self-destructive outcomes.
That historical context is really important. Now, you mentioned earlier the agent accusations often involved quoting scripture.
Yes, specifically Quranic verses.
Right. Critics use verses often from Surah Al-Ma'idah, Surah Al-Imran, Surah Al-Baqarah, the ones cautioning against taking Jews and Christians as aliyah friends, protectors, allies.
They throw these verses at him, saying, see, you're advocating a deal, essentially making friends with the enemy, violating the Quran.
So how does Imam handle that? Because advocating a deal does sound like a form of interaction, maybe even friendship to some. How does he reconcile this apparent contradiction?
This is really a cornerstone of his whole argument, his full case, as he often calls it. He addresses it using the Islamic jurisprudential principle of tatbiq.
Tatbiq, meaning?
Reconciliation or harmonization. It's about understanding how different texts or principles fit together, especially when they seem to conflict on the surface.
Okay.
He absolutely acknowledges those verses. He agrees they warn Muslims against forming alliances or loyalties that could undermine their faith, their security, or their allegiance to the Muslim community, the Ummah. But he argues taking these verses completely in isolation without looking at the whole Quran, the Sunnah, the context, the classical scholarship. Well, that leads to a very narrow, often misleading interpretation.
So context is key.
Hugely key. For instance, he might point to other verses, like one in Surah Al-Ma'idah itself, chapter 5, verse 5, which explicitly permits Muslims to marry chaste women from the people of the book, Jews and Christians.
Right. If marriage is allowed, clearly not all interaction is forbidden.
Exactly. If you can form such an intimate bond, then the prohibition can't be a blanket ban on any kind of interaction or friendship. The prohibition, he explains, is specifically against wallah-forming loyalties that make you compromise your core Islamic identity.
Or siding with those actively fighting Muslims.
Precisely. Siding with those who are actively waging war against Muslims with clear hostile intent, trying to destroy them. It's about strategic alliances, about not compromising your fundamental beliefs and security. It's not a ban on all communication, diplomacy, or pragmatic interactions needed for survival or peace.
So advocating for a deal to avoid destruction falls under permissible interaction.
That's his argument, especially when such deals are pursued precisely to avoid further destruction and immense suffering for the Muslim population. It becomes about prioritizing the greater good, maslaha, and applying practical wisdom, which are also strong Islamic principles.
And he accuses his critics of ignoring this nuance.
Yes, he frequently criticizes what he calls their pick-and-choose tactics, taking isolated sentences, half verses, out of context to deliberately distort his comprehensive argument. He even likens it to how people sometimes distort religious texts themselves to fit a preconceived agenda.
So the message is, look at the whole picture, understand the principles deeply.
Exactly. A holistic, nuanced understanding, not selective quoting, is essential to navigate these incredibly complex geopolitical realities, like seeking peace deals when facing overwhelming force.
That's a really crucial point about interpretation. Okay, let's move to a second scholarly point. Here, Emam seems to dig deeper into Iran's motivations, their consistent desire for a deal, and also the complex drivers behind the U.S.-Israel alliance.
Right, and this adds another important layer to his defense. And it helps contextualize Iran's actions, or lack thereof sometimes.
So he addresses critics directly again.
He does. He mentions someone called Asadullah Bai specifically, but uses it as an example of the criticism. He reiterates Iran's consistent historical pattern of seeking deals.
The JCPOA again.
Yes, he emphasizes Iran initiated and willingly participated in the 2015 JCPOA under Obama. And he brings back that stark economic reality, the 42,000 rial to $1 exchange rate.
As undeniable proof of their motive.
As a profound, undeniable driving factor. They desperately need sanctions relief for economic survival and well-being. This paints Iran as acting pragmatically out of national interest.
Then he gets into why the deal fell apart.
Right. Emam lays the blame squarely on President Trump, saying he unilaterally broke the deal in 2018. And crucially, he claims this was done at Israel's direct request.
Israel wanted the deal broken. Why?
According to Emam's analysis, Israel's primary fear wasn't necessarily an Iranian bomb tomorrow, but Iran's potential economic rise.
Economic rise.
Yeah. The fear was that if sanctions were lifted, Iran, with its vast oil reserves, could become a major economic power within maybe a decade.
And that would shift the regional balance.
Fundamentally, in ways Israel would see as deeply unfavorable. A strong, economically robust Iran is a very different strategic challenge.
Okay, that's a perspective you don't always hear.
It's definitely focused on the economic dimension. And Emam adds another point. He says Iran had already gone through 5 rounds of talks for a new deal before Israel launched its recent attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus.
5 rounds of talks were ongoing.
That's his claim. And he views that Israeli attack as a deliberate, calculated move to disrupt any potential new agreement, to keep Iran isolated under pressure, and prevent any kind of normalization or economic recovery.
So the narrative he presents is Iran seeking de-escalation and stability, while external forces actively sabotage that.
That's the core of his argument on this point, yes.
Yeah.
Iran as the party seeking deals, facing external disruption.
Now, here's where it gets really, maybe even controversially fascinating. Emam's explanation for the religious beliefs, he says, fuel the U.S.-Israel alliance.
Ah, yes. This is where the analysis moves beyond standard geopolitics.
It really does. It raises profound questions, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About how these deep, often unstated religious frameworks can influence global politics, maybe more than secular analysts realize.
Definitely. Emam explains that there's a significant segment within American Orthodox Christianity who hold a specific end times belief and eschatological view. They believe that the establishment of the State of Israel and, importantly, the future building of the Third Temple in Jerusalem
The Third Temple, right?
are absolute prerequisites, necessary steps for the second coming of Jesus, or Isa alayhi salam, as Muslims know him.
Okay, that's a known strand of Christian Zionism. But there's a twist, isn't there?
A very sharp twist in their view. They believe that when Jesus returns, he will ultimately destroy the Jews who reject him as the Messiah.
Wow. So support for Israel now is tied to an eventual destruction later in their theology.
In that particular theological framework, yes. It's a complex and, frankly, quite startling dynamic.
And how does the Jewish perspective fit in, according to Emam?
Well, he contrasts this with Zionist Jews, those who actively support the State of Israel and its expansionist policies. They also have an eschatological belief tied to the temple.
What's their belief?
They believe that their Messiah will not arrive until the Third Temple is built on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem.
So both groups see the temple as essential for their messianic hopes, but for different messiahs and with different outcomes for the Jewish people.
Exactly. It creates this incredibly powerful, though deeply paradoxical religious alignment that underpins much of the U.S.-Israel alliance, according to Emam's analysis. A shared apocalyptic vision driving political support, even if their ultimate theological goals diverge dramatically.
It's a strange convergence.
It is. And Emam is very careful here. He makes a crucial distinction. He separates Zionist Jews from those he calls pure Jews, or groups like Neturei Karta.
Who are
They are Orthodox Jewish groups who religiously oppose the very existence of the State of Israel. They believe it's an affront to God's will, that Jews should wait for the Messiah before establishing a state. And often, they stand in solidarity with Palestinians.
That's a critical distinction to make. Avoids lumping all Jewish people together.
Absolutely vital clarification. It prevents generalizations and highlights that Zionism is a political ideology, not synonymous with Judaism itself. Many Jews oppose it.
And Emam suggests this religious dimension influences political figures.
Yes, he specifically mentions former President Trump. He suggests that Trump and figures like him might view their policies in the Middle East like moving the embassy, recognizing Golan Heights not just as political moves, but as divinely ordained actions.
Almost like fulfilling prophecy, God's will for conflict.
That's the implication Emam draws. This framework helps us understand how concepts from religious eschatology, the Messiah, the Messiah in Islam, the Dajjal or Antichrist, and their parallels in other faiths can get tangled up in political decisions.
So actions that look purely strategic might have these deep ideological, even apocalyptic roots.
According to Emam, yes. It shifts the whole analysis away from just economics or political interests, adding this profound, spiritual, and potentially dangerous dimension to the conflict.
Okay, that's a lot to take in on point 2. Let's move to the third point. Here, Emam seems to pivot back to a more, stark assessment of modern warfare.
Yes, contrasting it sharply with the kind of emotional rhetoric he sees as clouding people's judgment. It's a very practical, almost harsh reality check.
Grounded, you might say.
Very grounded. What's central here is Emam's insistence on absolute pragmatism when discussing military realities. He keeps refuting the emotional reactions to his comments on the Iron Dome.
Still circling back to that.
Yes, because it illustrates his main point. He emphasizes again, his intention is to push, to galvanize Muslim nations to develop real, robust military capabilities, especially advanced missile systems, effective defenses.
And he uses his own background again.
He does, drawing on his professional experience to say, look, effective defense needs concrete, technological solutions, hard work, serious investment, not just wishful thinking or spiritual fervor alone.
He seems quite critical of certain voices.
Extremely critical. He launches this powerful critique against, unrealistic expectations and false narratives, the kind spread by some religious figures, maybe some YouTubers.
What kind of narratives?
Narratives promising quick, easy victory, or suggesting miraculous divine intervention will just happen without the necessary preparation, the strategic effort, the asbab we talked about.
And he sees danger in this.
Huge danger. He points to tragic examples. Look at Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, countries where he argues grand claims of easy resistance or divine help against powerful professional armies led directly to immense suffering, widespread destruction, the loss of countless ordinary lives.
His point being?
His point is stark. Unprepared nations, stirred up by emotional rhetoric and rushing into conflict, often bring catastrophe upon their own people. The cost is devastating.
So warfare is serious business.
Profoundly serious. It demands meticulous strategic planning, huge resources, realistic assessments of your own capabilities and the enemy's. Not just emotional speeches or expecting miracles without putting in the work.
It sounds like a very sobering message, especially for parts of the Muslim world where maybe that rhetoric is common.
It's definitely sobering.
Yeah.
And it connects right back forcefully to that Islamic principle of asbab, the obligation to take all necessary physical means, prepare properly, then trust in God.
He uses historical examples here too, right?
Masterfully. He cites key moments from early Islamic history to illustrate this timeless wisdom. He talks about Khalid ibn al-Walid.
The famous general.
Yes. In the Battle of Mu'tah, facing overwhelming Byzantine forces, Khalid made the incredibly difficult but militarily brilliant decision to conduct this strategic retreat.
Saving the Muslim army.
Exactly. He saved them from annihilation, preserved the core of the Muslim forces for future victories. It was an act of profound military wisdom, prioritizing survival and long-term strategy over blind, perhaps suicidal heroism in that moment.
That's a powerful example. Any others?
He also highlights Salahuddin Ayyubi.
Saladin, yes. The liberator of Jerusalem.
The very same. Emam points out Salahuddin's approach wasn't impulsive. It was patient, strategic, spanning decades, some say nearly 90 years of groundwork by Muslims before him. He built alliances, consolidated power, united factions, waited for the right moment.
Not just charging in?
Not at all. It demonstrated the absolute importance of long-term strategic planning, careful resource management, political maneuvering, and choosing the opportune time for military action.
So these examples show that divine help often comes after human effort.
That's the strong implication in Islamic understanding. It's contingent upon human effort, meticulous planning, wise leadership, and often very difficult decisions, not just passive waiting.
He also gets technical about missiles again.
He does. He talks about the limitations of standard ballistic missiles, their inherent lack of pinpoint accuracy.
How inaccurate.
He mentions they typically have a circular error probable, or CEP, maybe falling within a 500-meter radius of the intended target. They aren't like modern guided missiles or smart drones that can hit a specific building.
So the damage is widespread.
It's often indiscriminate, yes. He implies this might explain why, for instance, an Iranian ballistic missile likely wouldn't hit a specific target like an Israeli hospital, despite claims. Their nature is to cause broader damage in an area.
And this highlights.
It highlights the horrific reality for civilians caught in the target zone, the suffering caused by lack-precise weapons. And then he contrasts this grim reality with
the armchair warriors.
Exactly. He strongly criticizes those who incite war from their AC rooms, maybe making AI-generated videos. His nod to online provocateurs, people who whip up emotions but bear none of the consequences themselves.
While ordinary people suffer.
While ordinary people on the ground bear the brunt, the death, the destruction. It's a sharp critique of irresponsible rhetoric from those safely distanced from the battlefield.
Okay, that covers the harsh realities of warfare in point 3. Now, for his fourth point, Emam shifts perspective again. He seems to firmly position Iran as the victim in the current situation, right?
Yes, he makes that assertion quite clearly. And then he pivots to exposing what he sees as deep international hypocrisy, especially regarding nuclear capabilities.
So victimhood and hypocrisy, how does he establish Iran as the victim?
His argument rests on who initiated the recent escalation. He states unequivocally that Israel initiated the attack, specifically referencing the bombing of the Iranian consulate in Damascus, which is technically Iranian sovereign territory.
And therefore, Iran's response was?
Retaliation, self-defense under international law, in his view. He argues Israel's action forced Iran to respond.
And he contrasts this with Iran's diplomatic efforts.
Constantly. He highlights Iran's continued engagement in trying to find peaceful solutions. It talks through the OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, through the UN, engaging directly with major European powers, Germany, France, the UK.
To show they want de-escalation.
Exactly. To demonstrate a consistent desire to resolve things diplomatically, even while under attack or provocation. This narrative frames Iran as the party seeking peace, forced into retaliation.
Then he moves to the nuclear issue and Netanyahu.
Right. He goes after what he calls Benjamin Netanyahu's long history over 30 years. Emam claims of making false claims about Iran being on the verge of getting a nuclear bomb. Just months away, Netanyahu often says.
Claims that haven't materialized, Emam argues.
Haven't materialized, yes. He contrasts this constant alarmism with Iran's actual record of cooperation with the IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog. Iran allows inspections. They are part of the system.
And the Fatwa, he mentions that again.
Crucially, he brings up Ayatollah Khamenei's 2003 Fatwa, the religious decree declaring nuclear weapons haram, forbidden.
Why forbidden?
Because they kill civilians indiscriminately. They are weapons of mass destruction, incompatible with Islamic ethics of warfare, according to this Fatwa. Emam presents this as a foundational internal check on Iran's program, reinforcing their claim it's purely for peaceful energy.
That's Iran's position. How does he contrast this with Israel's?
Starkly. He points directly at Israel's undeclared nuclear arsenal.
Yeah.
Their long-standing policy of nuclear ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying they have nukes, though it's widely accepted they do.
And their relationship with international bodies.
That's the key hypocrisy, Emam argues. Israel has zero cooperation with the IAEA regarding its own suspected nuclear program. They haven't signed the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
The main treaty to stop the spread of nukes.
The very one. So Emam frames it as a glaring double standard. Iran, an NPT signatory cooperating with the IAEA, though sometimes contentiously, faces intense scrutiny, crippling sanctions. Israel, a non-signatory outside the inspection regime with undeclared weapons, faces far less pressure on this specific issue.
That's a powerful contrast he's drawing.
It really is. And again, just for clarity, he reiterates the distinction between political Zionists and religious Jews like Neturei Karta, who oppose the state of Israel on religious grounds and often stand with Palestinians.
Keeping that nuance sharp.
Always. And he loops back briefly to former President Trump's alleged religious motivations, framing his pro-Israel actions as potentially driven by a belief in divine ordination, this God's will for conflict we discussed earlier.
Connecting the dots between the nuclear hypocrisy and those deeper, potentially religious drivers of policy.
Exactly. It weaves together the political, the military, the religious, and the ethical dimensions into a complex picture of perceived injustice and double standards on the global stage.
Okay, now, point 5. This sounds like where Emam really takes aim at hypocrisy within the Muslim community itself, right? Among religious factions and public figures.
Yes, this is definitely a segment where Emam is particularly direct, even scathing in his critique. He's looking inward here at intellectual dishonesty, as he sees it, within Islamic discourse.
Who does he single out?
He expresses, profound dismay at the hypocrisy he observes among certain influential religious factions, specifically mentioning Deobandis, Wahhabis, and Barelvis.
These are major schools of thought within Sunni Islam, especially in South Asia.
Correct. Distinct groups, often with differing interpretations, and unfortunately sometimes historical rivalries or animosity.
Then what's the hypocrisy he points out?
It's a sharp inconsistency, he argues. He says these very groups, who in the past often demonized Shia Muslims in Iran, sometimes issuing fatwas declaring them deviant or non-Muslim.
Okay.
Suddenly, now that Iran is under external threat from Israel and the U.S., these same groups are criticizing him, Emam, for not being pro-Iran enough, or for suggesting diplomacy instead of immediate confrontation.
So their stance shifted based on
personal animosity towards him, Emam argues, rather than any consistent religious principle or genuine concern for the wider Muslim ummah. He sees it as sectarian bias hijacking the conversation.
He gives examples of this inconsistency.
He does. He mentions the prophecy of the black banners, Emam. It's a sign mentioned in some traditions, often associated with forces coming from the east, from Khorasan, historical region, including Afghanistan. He says these groups used to link this prophecy to forces emerging from Afghanistan. But now, because the Taliban, who are predominantly Deobandi, made a deal with the U.S., and agreed not to export their revolution.
So the Afghan link became inconvenient.
Politically inconvenient, yes. So now, Emam claims, these same groups suddenly start associating the Black Banners prophecy with Iran, simply because Iran is currently opposing the U.S. He sees this as pure opportunism, shifting interpretations to fit a political narrative, not consistent adherence to religious texts.
That's quite an accusation of intellectual maneuvering.
It is, and he doesn't stop there. He broadens his critique to religious scholars and motivational speakers more generally.
The ones calling for action.
Yes, the ones issuing fiery calls for jihad or demanding extreme, often reckless actions, usually from the comfort of their homes or studios. He points out they never actually participate in the fighting themselves.
While others pay the price.
Exactly. He criticizes their predictions of easy victories against professional armies, predictions that consistently prove false, leading only to immense suffering, displacement, and death for ordinary Muslims on the ground. Meanwhile, the speakers remain untouched.
And this ties back to his earlier points about preparation.
Directly, he hammers home again. Real warfare needs rigorous planning, strategy, resources, realistic assessment, the asbab. Not just emotional hype or blind faith in miracles without effort. He accuses these figures of misinterpreting Islamic history to promote reckless wars, ignoring the lessons of strategy and patience.
He also mentions their language, how they refer to Iranians.
Yes, another sign of hypocrisy, he argues. He highlights how some of these same critics refuse to use standard Islamic terms of respect for deceased Iranian figures. They won't say shaheed, martyr for someone like President Raisi after his death, or rahimullah, may Allah have mercy on him, for Imam Khomeini, because of underlying sectarian bias, Emam claims. Even when pretending to support Iran against an external enemy, their deep-seated sectarianism prevents them from affording basic Islamic courtesies, revealing their true feelings.
And again, the pick-and-choose criticism.
Constantly. He accuses his opponents of taking his statements completely out of context, grabbing sentences here and there to twist his overall argument, his full case. He likens it directly to the dangerous practice of distorting scripture itself to fit an agenda.
So the overarching message here is a call for intellectual honesty.
In critical thinking, yes. Within Islamic discourse itself, he's urging listeners, urging Muslims to see through the sectarian agendas, the hypocrisy, the emotional manipulation, and to demand comprehensive, honest analysis.
Which brings us back to that complex issue of jihad and the state.
Right. His critique isn't just about hypocrisy, it's about the misuse of Islamic concepts. He emphasizes that military jihad has strict rules in Islamic law. It's not something to be declared lightly based on emotion or sectarian hate.
It needs proper authority.
Proper authority from a legitimate Islamic state or leader, yes. Plus, thorough strategic planning, realistic assessment of capabilities, adherence to strict ethical rules of engagement. It's meant to uphold justice and protect life, not cause needless destruction through recklessness.
And the role of the state, the riyasat.
Crucial. Imam stresses that decisions about war, peace, foreign policy, these belong to the legitimate governing authority, the state. Citizens, he argues, should generally respect and support these decisions to maintain unity and prevent internal chaos.
Why is this so important?
Because internal anarchy, dissent, forming independent militias, these things fragment the community, undermine national strength, and make it impossible to face external challenges effectively. Unity and stability, loyalty to the state's legitimate decisions in these matters are paramount for survival and strength in today's world. It's a call for disciplined, unified action.
Okay, that's a very strong stance on internal cohesion and state authority. Let's move to the sixth point. Here, Emam seems to offer some direct advice, specifically regarding Pakistan's foreign policy toward Iran.
Yes, and he also provides insights into Iran's internal dynamics, focusing on regional stability.
What's his main advice for Pakistan?
It's very direct and quite stark. Pakistan should absolutely not support any efforts aimed at regime change in Iran.
Not support regime change. Why not?
He argues that the current religious government in Iran, despite external criticism, is actually broadly representative of the majority of its people. He claims it commands significant popular support, especially when Iran feels under external threat or aggression.
So external pressure actually strengthens internal cohesion.
That's his analysis. He believes the religious leadership provides a strong rallying point, a source of national unity, particularly when facing perceived foreign enemies. Interfering would backfire badly.
How badly?
He warns quite gravely that any attempt to, say, assassinate Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader, or forcibly impose some kind of puppet government, well, it wouldn't lead to a stable democracy.
No. What would it lead to?
Decades. Decades of profound instability, chaos, maybe even civil war inside Iran, which would inevitably spill over and destabilize the entire region, affecting Pakistan, Afghanistan, the Gulf Arab states, everyone. The consequences would be catastrophic and long-lasting.
And he links this stability to the religious leadership's authority.
He does. He underscores the deep reverence many Iranians and Shias elsewhere hold for their living religious authorities, their Miraji. Figures like Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran and Ayatollah Sistani in Iraq.
Their fatwas carry immense weight.
Immense moral authority.
Yeah.
He gives the example of Ayatollah Sistani's fatwa against ISIS in Iraq, which mobilized millions of ordinary people to volunteer and fight, arguably saving Baghdad. This demonstrates the power of this religious leadership to ensure internal cohesion and mobilize the population, especially against perceived existential threats.
So undermining that leadership would unleash chaos.
That's his warning. It would destroy the existing social and political fabric, however flawed, without any guarantee of a stable replacement, leading only to prolonged conflict.
And he loops back to Imam Hussein again here.
Yes, strategically. He reiterates his clarification about Imam Hussein's journey to Kufa.
Why bring it up again in this context?
To reinforce that earlier point about understanding history correctly.
Yeah.
It wasn't a reckless military campaign. It was a political move responding to a call for leadership. The conflict was forced upon him. By repeating this, he's drawing a parallel, urging against reckless, externally imposed actions, like regime change, and advocating for understanding the internal dynamics and leadership structures, even if you disagree with them.
So it's about respecting internal realities versus imposing external solutions.
Exactly. It's grounding the discussion of Iran's current socio-political situation in what he presents as accurate historical understanding, warning against repeating historical missteps driven by misunderstanding or external agendas. It advocates for respecting the internal dynamics that provide stability, however imperfect.
Okay. That brings us to the seventh and final point. Here, Imam seems to highlight some diplomatic successes, particularly by Pakistan, and reflects more broadly on the international situation.
Right. He shifts focus to proactive efforts to manage the crisis and Pakistan's role in them.
What specific Pakistani effort does he focus on?
He talks about a significant meeting, the one between Pakistan's Chief of Army Staff, Field Marshal Syed C. Munir, and former U.S. President Trump.
Okay, that meeting generated some speculation, didn't it, about bases?
It did. And Imam directly refutes those claims, the idea that Pakistan conceded military bases to the U.S. He says that's not what it was about.
So what was it about, according to Imam?
He explains it was pre-scheduled and had two main goals. First, to thank the U.S. for its role in mediating tensions between India and Pakistan. Second, and crucially in this context, to specifically ask the U.S. to use its influence to help de-escalate the Iran-Israel war.
Pakistan actively asking the U.S. to cool things down.
Yes, and Imam views this meeting and another major Pakistani diplomatic effort as significant achievements.
What was the other effort?
Pakistan successfully persuaded 21 Arab countries to issue statements in favor of Iran, condemning the attack on its consulate.
21 Arab states supporting Iran. That is unusual.
Highly unusual, given the usual regional divisions. Imam sees this unified stance, brokered by Pakistan, as a major diplomatic win. He argues these actions showcase Pakistan's crucial and perhaps growing role as an influential mediator on the international stage.
He even mentions the White House invitation.
Yes, he notes it was the first time a Pakistani army chief received such an invitation, suggesting it signals Pakistan's increasing diplomatic weight and strategic importance in Washington's eyes, despite any underlying tensions.
And throughout this, he keeps stressing the importance of state unity.
Absolutely. He consistently emphasizes the need for citizens to support their state's decisions in these high-stakes matters of war and peace. Rally behind the leadership, don't create internal anarchy or chaos, avoid forming independent militias.
Why the strong emphasis on avoiding internal chaos?
He warns again, very starkly, against emotional rhetoric that leads to self-destruction. And here, he draws on Pakistan's own painful history. With internal terrorism, sectarian violence, the devastating consequences of getting drawn into proxy wars. These experiences, he argues, are a harsh lesson in the critical need for internal cohesion and disciplined, unified action directed by the state. Fragmentation is weakness.
He also notes the broader international community's efforts.
Yes, he highlights that it's not just Pakistan. Major European powers, Germany, France, UK, plus the OIC, the UN, they are all actively pushing for de-escalation, trying to get peace talks back on track. There's a global consensus, he suggests, that favors diplomacy over wider war.
And he cautions against the idea of military victory over Iran.
Passionately. He dismisses the notion of conquering Iran, a vast country of 90 million people, through military force. He argues forcefully it wouldn't lead to a stable regime change.
What would it lead to?
Prolonged civil war, widespread regional instability, immense human suffering. A failed state scenario, essentially. Far worse than the current situation, however problematic.
So his conclusion is?
Peace. Peace, through negotiation, through deals, is ultimately in the best interest of everyone. Iran, its neighbors, the wider Muslim world, and indeed the entire globe.
But he adds a condition, right?
A crucial one. He says if, despite all these diplomatic efforts, the war continues, if Iran remains under attack, then Pakistan has an undeniable Islamic duty to support Iran.
Based on what principle?
Based on the principle of the Ummah, the brotherhood, and mutual responsibility of Muslims. So it's pragmatism first, seek peace. But if peace fails and a fellow Muslim nation is unjustly attacked, the duty to support kicks in. It's a balance between realism and religious obligation.
Okay, that covers all 7 points. It's a very detailed and multi-layered analysis he presents.
It really is. Complex, sometimes controversial, but definitely thought-provoking.
So after digging through all of that, what does it all mean for us, for you, the listener? Let's try to distill some core insights, some key takeaways from this deep dive into Engineer Muhammad Ali Mirza's analysis.
Absolutely. I think this deep dive offers several really crucial takeaways for you, our listener, to maybe mull over when you're trying to navigate these incredibly complex geopolitical issues, especially with an Islamic lens.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, and maybe foremost, is the prioritization of pragmatism and realism. Emam consistently hammers this home. There's this vital, ongoing need for Muslim nations, leaders, and even individuals to base their actions and reactions on, well, ground reality. Meaning objective assessments of actual military capabilities, yours and theirs. Understanding the practical, often devastating consequences of war, not getting swept away by purely emotional rhetoric or unrealistic expectations, or ideological purity tests that completely ignore the real cost in human lives and national stability.
Reality over rhetoric. Got it. What's next?
Secondly, his analysis powerfully emphasizes strategic patience and thorough preparation. This is where those historical examples come in.
Khalid ibn al-Walid, Salahuddin Ayyubi.
Exactly. His deliberate use of these figures isn't just name-dropping. It's to highlight a profound lesson from Islamic tradition. True leadership, effective action, especially in conflict, demands meticulous strategic planning. It requires wise resource management, patience, and the critical ability to recognize and act at the opportune moment.
So it's not about impulsive reactions.
Definitely not.
Right.
It's about thoughtful, often long-term preparation, calculating risks, building strength, waiting for the right conditions, rather than rushing into unwinnable or devastating conflicts based on emotion. That principle of asbab again.
Makes sense. A third takeaway.
A third, and this is deeply vital in today's fractured world, is the importance of unity and loyalty to the state, the concept of riyasat. Emam consistently stresses the absolute need for national cohesion.
Supporting the government's decisions on war and peace.
Generally, yes, in these critical matters. He argues this is essential to prevent internal chaos, fragmentation, and to allow the nation to effectively face external challenges. A unified front, coordinated action, directed towards collective well-being rather than internal squabbling or independent actions that are often fragmented and self-defeating.
Unity for strength. Okay. Number 4.
Fourth, there's his passionate, almost relentless call for combating sectarianism and intellectual hypocrisy, particularly within Islamic discourse itself.
This was a major theme in point 5.
A huge theme. His analysis is a continuous, urgent plea for intellectual honesty and critical thinking. He urges listeners to reject sectarian biases, to see through self-serving motives that he argues fundamentally undermine collective Muslim strength and prevent genuine progress.
Because these divisions weaken the Ummah.
Exactly. He contends they paralyze the Muslim world's ability to respond coherently, effectively, and ethically to global challenges. It's a call to rise above petty factionalism for the greater good.
And finally, the 5th key takeaway.
And finally, I think a powerful overarching theme, woven throughout his entire commentary, is the imperative of seeking de-escalation and prioritizing diplomacy whenever possible.
Even when under pressure.
Especially then, perhaps. Emam's consistent support for Iran's pursuit of a deal, his highlighting of diplomatic efforts, it all points to a deep-seated belief that finding diplomatic resolutions, however difficult, is paramount. Why? To prevent widespread destruction, to avoid immense human suffering, to prevent protracted instability that benefits no one in the long run.
So it's a practical approach, prioritizing life and stability.
Yes. A practical, often difficult path that prioritizes saving lives and maintaining regional stability over ideological rigidity, saving face, or purely emotional reactions. It's about seeking the least harmful path, even if it requires compromise.
Pragmatism, patience, unity, honesty, and diplomacy, those seem like the core pillars of his message here.
I think that sums it up well. Those are definitely the key threads running through his analysis of this complex conflict.
Okay, now before we wrap up, we need to state our standard but essential clarification.
Yes, the disclaimer, always important.
Absolutely. So just to be crystal clear for everyone listening, this deep dive unveiling the Iran-Israel war, a scholarly Islamic commentary, is our public analytical review of Engineer Muhammad Ali Mirza's public session video number 204.
Our commentary on his publicly available work.
Exactly. It is absolutely not intended to offend or harm any individual or any group. All the core content we discussed is based directly on that public video.
Now, sometimes we might add words or phrases for clarity, right?
Yes. Any additional words, contextual references, or explanations provided by me as the host or by you are purely for clarification and analysis from our side. They might not reflect Engineer Muhammad Ali Mirza's exact wording or intent.
And importantly, Engineer Muhammad Ali Mirza himself is not responsible for our interpretations or critiques or any commentary presented here in this deep dive.
Not at all. Any apparent contradictions you might hear or criticisms voiced, those are strictly our own analytical viewpoints as commentators.
And of course, all the original video content remains the property of Engineer Muhammad Ali Mirza and his publishers.
We respect that entirely. This deep dive doesn't infringe upon any copyrights. We operate under the principles of fair use for the purpose of review, commentary, and education.
Fair enough. Good to have that clear.
Definitely. So that really brings us to the end of another, I think, quite insightful deep dive.
It was certainly dense. A lot to think about.
It was. We genuinely hope that this analytical commentary has given you, our listener, a clearer, perhaps more nuanced understanding of Engineer Muhammad Ali Mirza's perspectives on this incredibly fraught Iran-Israel conflict.
Perspectives grounded in his understanding of scholarly Islamic thought, but also deeply engaged with geopolitical realities.
Precisely. And always remember, knowledge is truly valuable when it's not just heard, but understood deeply, reflected upon, and applied wisely.
Well said, and we really should encourage everyone, if you're interested, to watch Engineer Muhammad Ali Mirza's original video.
Absolutely. That's YouTube video ID 204, titled Iran-Israel War. Go watch it for the full context, hear his arguments in his own voice.
Because your own deeper exploration, engaging directly with the source material, that's where real personal understanding truly begins.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey today, for investing your time to become more well-informed.
Yes, thank you for listening.
We really look forward to exploring another crucial topic with you in our next deep dive. Until then, if you found this valuable, please do share it with your family and friends. And above all, stay curious.